The overturning of Roe v. Wade has shown us that the issue is not done. We are not all on the same page. We don't all agree. And we have our own deeply passionately held perspectives, no matter which side of the issue we stand on. Well, today we'll be talking with Patrice D'Amato, an RN, a nurse who has worked in abortion clinics for years. And she's going to give us the human side of the equation from the view of the clinic. Join us to find out more.
Soul Nectar Show, the Soul Nectar Show. You're invited, delighted to discover who you are. Anything is possible if you believe. So join us on this beautiful journey. Soul Nectar Show, Soul Nectar Show, Soul Nectar Show.
Before we start this episode, I, Carrie Hummingbird,
And I, Akeem Sami,
want you to know that
you are invited
you're invited to join Soul Nectar Tribe.
If you like what you hear on Soul Nectar Show,
You will love being in person with us in Soul Nectar Tribe.
we invite you to check it out. First 30 days is free.
Right now, go to carriehummingbird.com, KERRI hummingbird.com/membership and sign up. We'll see you at our next tribe gathering. And now, on to the show. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Soul Nectar Show, that show where we talk about all things essence, where we gather around the campfire and we share our stories of connection to that which is greater than us, to the big mystery beyond the veil, to those synchronistic moments that lead us inexorably towards a deeper understanding of ourselves and life and this planet and what we are here for, and all the myriad ways that that soul curriculum shows up in Earth School. I'm your host, Carrie Hummingbird. And today's conversation is a challenging one for most human beings because it's really that conversation at the edge of our comfort zone of life and death. And it involves babies. And, what can be more precious than babies? We all rush to protect the babies and we all love the babies. And, there's another person involved in that conversation, and that would be the woman and the womb. And, we are really going to be venturing into a conversation that in many ways has become the holy war for the womb. Who gets control over the womb? And we're going to have a really an interesting conversation with a current nurse that is actually has worked in abortion clinics for many, many years and has lots of information and lots of personal experience on the actual stories of people's paths through that decision of abortion. And she's here with us today as her new book is out, The View from the Clinic, and how this is intended to humanize the act of abortion from the eyes and heart of a clinic nurse. And today with us is Patrice D'Amato RN. Hi, Patrice. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
I know it takes a lot of courage to publish a book about this topic and to put all of this information into the collective that feels passionately from many points of view about this topic. And I know that you've probably had to straddle many, many lines in order to be courageous and to put this message forth. So I want to first say thank you so much for being willing to put this information together, and also for the courage in your heart to show up and be visible and present for this conversation as well.
It's good to be here. I don't think I wanted to be here, but here I am.
Yeah, here I am anyway. You say that in the book, actually. You're like, I didn't even want to write this book.
No, I did not really want to write the book. The book was being asked to be, they asked me, please write this. Really not asked. I was told it's time. And I started this book 3-4 years ago, really, long before the advent of all this crazy political stuff started rearing its head. And when it, came to getting to publish, I was thinking about it last February, and I kind of thought maybe Roe versus Wade was gonna drop. And I knew that this book then would coincide with the publishing of it, the release of it would be right around the time when all of this political stuff was going on. And that was further confirmation for me that this isn't about my comfort. It's about me doing the best I can to normalize this conversation. You talked about my history a little bit. I worked in abortion care about 20 years ago, about 8 years full time in a variety of capacities, but mostly as a nurse and nurse practitioner. I walked away. It was so frustrating. It's very routine, very normal, very really boring medical care. It's not that hard. But the stories that went around it, the culture of misunderstanding and passion around this very everyday thing, people weren't ready for what I had to say. And I wasn't ready to say what I had to say. I had to process it all. So I tucked it all under my belt and I went about my way for about 15 or 20 years. I went into teaching. I did some geriatrics. I did a variety of things. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, during the Me Too movement, it came back and I realized I couldn't listen anymore to the rhetoric. I couldn't get my head around it as a nurse because it was so far removed from the world that I knew in terms of abortion.
So what are some key differences that you notice in the rhetoric from what's some key differences that you're like, this is just not the experience inside the clinic?
Yeah. So, I always talk about my last day and I talk about this poignantly in the book, which was a healing journey for me. But the last day, my last straw day was, I'm going into work just like a nurse goes into work, right? I was going to go change into my scrubs, take care of patients, screen them for any, medical problems for a very simple outpatient procedure. And as I'm walking through the parking lot, the protesters. It was the third Sunday of the month and they were wild that day. Wild, shaking the signs with the baby doll limbs hanging off of them and chanting, and some people spit at you. And this craziness. And there were people, all kinds of people, but most prominently, and we know this, are older white men. We could talk about that if we wanted, but we don't have to. And then, and some parent looking people. And then I go into the waiting room. And I just looked around at it looks like the deli counter before Christmas. I always say that. There's just all of humanity there needing what they need. But most poignantly, I saw, the usual smattering of teenagers or young adults. And I thought, what the heck? Their parents are outside waving baby doll limbs. And this is just a medical clinic, like where we're doing what we need to do. And the disconnect was just so powerful for me. The passion and the fear. As I've said, it's a holy war. The people outside are waging a holy war. I say this is the era of fetal worship. We're worshiping, or some are worshiping the fetus, and they feel like they're conducting this holy war to save the babies. And when you look at the history of this is new. It is not a phenomenon that we have seen until recently, maybe like the last 100, 150 years or so. This was not a holy war of any sort. People didn't believe that life started at conception. It was not a thing. So, there's that. And then there's just the whole medical aspect. It's really like a woman having a miscarriage. It's a spontaneous abortion is the medical term for a miscarriage. So, whether it's spontaneous or elective, it's still abortion. And so for me, it fascinates me.
Yeah. So how do you explain this? I mean, I know that you did a lot of research to write your book and you did research into what were the prevailing attitudes about abortion previously. And you found some interesting things actually in the Catholic religion, which was really fascinating. I read in the book. Share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah. So this isn't unusual knowledge. It's not esoteric. It is right out there. And if you want to look at a great Yes, documentary. There's tons of stuff out here. This is not a secret. And even the Catholic Church knows that it's not a secret. They don't talk about it much. But so up until recently, and I'm going to say about 100, 150 years ago, the Catholic Church believed that a fetus wasn't ensouled, meaning it didn't get a soul until about 40 days after conception for a male and 80 days after conception for a female. Why that is, I didn't dig deep enough for that. But it came from Aristotle, then St. Augustine in the 5th century, I believe, picked it up. And then it was picked up again by Thomas Aquinas. I think I'm saying that right. I'm not Catholic by background. And that was what, maybe the 17th century? So that attitude held for hundreds, thousands of years, really, that, there's no ensoulment, that a fetus does not have a soul until almost halfway through a pregnancy. And most people believed, as strongly as people believe today, that it begins, at conception. The very strongly held belief was that there's no problem with terminating a pregnancy before quickening. So quickening is when the mother can actually feel the movement of the fetus inside. And at that point, it did become a problem. But up until that time, this whole thing about the sanctity of an egg being fertilized by a sperm is very new. And that shocked me when I started to write the book. And, I have a lot of compassion for why people feel so drawn to that. I have my thoughts about that. I think that people are really identifying with the sanctity of their own lives, and they're really terrified of the thought that they weren't allowed to come, or somebody, a woman, their mother, is going to annihilate them. So that's sort of where my thoughts and my writing sort of went.
Yeah, this whole idea that the power of the woman, right? And this concerted effort to diminish the power of women out of fear of what choices women might make, right? And so trying to force power over women to prevent them from making choices, and then not really seeing that that's actually aggression towards women. It's very aggressive towards women. It's misogynistic in such the same way that maybe in some countries women would be, and as we've seen in all of the things going on in Iran, women have been beaten to death for not wearing their hijab. And now we have this whole protest going on nationwide in Iran because they're just done with this kind of militaristic, misogynistic behavior towards women. And so this is the same, because if a man in that culture doesn't like what a woman's doing, he doesn't like how she's wearing her scarf, he can kill her. And now in America, in many states, we have the same. If a woman is pregnant, she needs support inside her body in order to survive the pregnancy, she cannot have it now, because now she is no longer given the choice to protect her own life and her own health, because it's been taken away by this sort of dogmatic, misogynistic point of view. And so I am equating the two. I'm saying they're the same. What do you feel about that? Is that a little too extreme, or is that pretty much accurate?
I don't think it's extreme at all. I actually had never really thought of it that way. But when you say it that way, yeah, because what we're seeing too is not only is the woman not allowed to choose, but the medical team is totally confused, with their hands tied in many cases. I talked about recently, and I was remembering, a patient that I took care of when I was young. And this equates exactly to what's happening to women's bodies and to the medical team that's trying to care for them. So when I was 16, I had a patient who, it was my very first, I was like a nurse's aide, and they put me in this room with this man who had a gangrenous leg, and his family refused to amputate it. Now, getting rid of that leg, even if it had just been at the ankle, it would have saved his life. But no, they refused, and they insisted that they couldn't take the foot, or they couldn't take it kept creeping up, this dead tissue, and it will kill the person. And so the other day I said, oh my goodness, this is exactly what's happening to women with a fetus or a pregnancy that has, gone bad. And so these women are forced to carry until their life is in danger. This is bizarre to me. And it is not so different, I don't think, like you said, than what's happening, if a woman doesn't wear her scarf right. But we have the medical team involved now too, who's standing there saying, well, what point the laws they're just open to interpretation and people are confused. And so it's the exact same thing. We're standing in our modern high-tech hospitals trying to decide, when is this woman going to get seriously ill, get an infection from this dying fetus inside? At what point are we going to then save this mother? And I mean, there's no point. The fetus isn't viable anyway. So like, what the heck? I agree with you.
Yeah. And it takes the choice out of the women, right? I mean, so all these women wearing hijabs that don't choose to wear one are forced to wear one in order to assuage the beliefs and perspectives of the government that is controlling them. And in such the same way, now in several states in this United States, women are forced into a perspective that they may not hold about the fetus and about their power of choice. I heard from many Jewish people who said, we don't believe the way Christians believe. And so we do not think that this country should embrace Christian religious perspective when there are people in this country of many different religious and spiritual traditions. And we're supposed to be a country that is freedom of religion. And instead, we're starting to see the infiltration of one particular perspective dominating our law. And we're supposed to have a division of church and state in this country. So, I mean, what's your answer to that? Because that seems to be, I know that you mentioned in your book that there was a Native American who was like pro-abortion, like where, and I can see that perspective too, because we have too many people on the planet just procreating willy-nilly, and we're far consuming the resources over our relations. We don't even consider the plants and the animals and the insects and all the other life forms on this planet. We're just dominate everything, thinking that we're like the most important being on the planet, right? And so the Native American perspective is probably kind of along those lines, like, yes, let's stop being a virus on Mother Earth. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. And when I was saying to my husband this morning, I said, gardening, and I have that whole first chapter. One day I was out in my garden and I'm pulling perfectly healthy plants because they're weeds to me. They're weeds to me. And you have to thin them in order for others to grow. And maybe the ones that you selected, the ones you went to the farm market or the garden store and you put in specifically to grow. And then there's all these other things that are perfectly healthy, but we don't want them. And there are a lot of people who believe that the humans are above that, but I don't believe that. I think that we're all living beings, and there is always stewardship about how we decide when to thin things. And can you do that with sensitivity? Can you do that with honoring, the life force that might have been? I believe you totally can. Yeah.
This is why we have science that is able to detect in advance harmful, life-restricting, life-constricting diseases in babies before they become born, before they have to then face an entire lifetime of being punished in that way, really painfully punished, to be in a body with those kinds of diseases. And now we are not able to be compassionate. We're not able to be stewards of the children coming in because of these dogmatic laws. So I'm sure you have an example of someone who came in and the choice was because this baby is going to be suffering its whole life if it's born.
Oh, absolutely. And that's just happened not long ago. And that's very often what they call a late term abortion, which really it's only halfway through pregnancy when somebody's saying it's late term. So I don't really know what that late term means, but it happens all the time. And for the parents that are going through this, it's not easy if you've gotten that far along. But the thought of, like you said, it may be torture for the child, and it's certainly torture and agony for the parents. And it may be a beautiful experience. I do know of people who have had severely disabled children, and they feel that the way it worked for them, it was a deep spiritual experience. But on the other hand, there's so much suffering, and it's not an easy choice to make at all. So I see these patients come in and with, late term, and they're usually coming from out of state, because where I am, we do up to 24 weeks. But it's when you get that far, it's rare. It's only about 10% of all, maybe less. Actually, it's way less. When you get that late, maybe about 5% of all abortions. And it's devastating. It's not an easy decision to make. And I think what's happening is that politicians are getting involved because they don't trust women's judgment about what that experience is going to be like for them, for the child, for the family, for the world. We're not trusting women, or we're very, very frightened of women having that kind of power.
Yeah. So again, it comes back to not trusting women to make the best decision for themselves and for their families, and thinking that you know better for someone than they know for themselves. And I know that, I don't know a whole lot about religion, but I know that there's a lot of verses in the Bible about not casting the first stone and not being the judge of your brothers and sisters, like you know better to do than they know. And yet here, the sort of fundamentalists have jumped on the back with the politicians and found a really convenient way to judge every single woman as incapable of making the right choice for herself and for her family.
Yeah. And they've also stymied the medical team or medical experts, scientists. So there's also that whole piece of it, because, we used to be pretty paternalistic in the medical world, like, oh, well, we know what's best. And I think a lot of, up until recently, politicians were like, okay, well, we'll trust the experts, but we don't have that anymore either, which, there's good and bad to that, I suppose, as well. So yeah, we don't really have any of that anymore. So we have a handful of fundamentalists who are feeling really good about this. I can just feel the
righteousness.
Yeah, it feels so good. It's like, oh, we don't get to do holy wars anymore, and we don't get to run around and save the unborn or save someone. And so they're really getting their chops into this, that we're going out and we're saving these babies from these untimely deaths. And it's distorted. It's a little misplaced, but it's an energy that comes from millennia, I think.
Yeah. And it's that scratch that, they need to like scratch that itch. It's like, oh, I need to get righteous about this, and I need to fight that devil, and I need to get out there and just show them the way. And that kind of holy war, like we talked about, over the womb. And even the womb of an 11-year-old child who's raped by her father. This is where I have a problem with the fundamentalist pro-lifers, because I don't think it's pro-life to have a child's body carry a baby and go through that metamorphosis that I went through at 30 years old and was challenged by, with full responsibility and knowing. I think that lacks care and compassion for the child girl who is taken by her father or her brother or somebody else in her family, rapes her, and then there's a baby of that. And I've heard just the most coldest, closed-hearted people so passionate about saving the babies, and yet have zero regard for these molested children. It doesn't compute for me. How did you cope with that?
It doesn't compute for me either. And I have had, young, 11, I think is the youngest I ever had. And again, where I live, I was able to live through that. And I still am, because I still get patients that young. I'm able to live through that because we're allowed to terminate the pregnancy. And even then, it's When you sit in front of that 11-year-old and you have to try to figure out what happened, I usually have a sense of that from the counselors and all the preoperative, pre-procedure work that's done. But it blows my mind. And I usually, at some point, I have to step out and take a deep breath. And then I got to do what I got to do to help this little girl get through this. Bring your teddy bear, bring whatever you want into that room to do what you need to do. So for me, I can do that and give this kid a new start. It's never completely new, but it's way better than them potentially dying because somebody wants them to carry another child. It's like a child carrying a child. Neither one is going to do well. And it's, as you said, it's not risk-free for a child of 11 to be pregnant and carry that through to a full-term pregnancy. It's just not. So you're dooming the mother. The owner of the womb is doomed in this situation. There's no good way out for them. And like you said, I have heard the rhetoric as well. And I think the whole world is open mouthed saying, wait a minute, okay, you don't like abortion, but rape and incest and what? We're all just open mouthed. I don't think anybody could get their head around this bandwagon that people have jumped on. It's so distorted and so extremist.
Yeah, it's actually really sad to me that there's people in our world who have closed their hearts to the little girls who have been raped. An 11-year-old child is not responsible for turning some geezer on and getting impregnated. Like, that's not her fault. And the same with, women who find themselves in that scenario at whatever age, get the roofie, and then end up pregnant. And certainly there are many, many women who I'm sure make mistakes, right? Don't take care of themselves, are not proactive with birth control. The stories are all over the map. And this is where I come in and I ask the question, with so much contextual information for each case, with so much context and the relevance of that context, how can you just make one decision for everyone? That's the part I don't understand, because I feel like that really lacks compassion and empathy for the particulars of each individual case.
Yeah. And that's where the quagmire is. That's where people are stuck. Their hearts are not open. They're not capable of hearing the stories. They're just not. It's interesting. I went to my doctor the other day and she's very, very pro-life. And it was a really interesting conversation. It's not that she doesn't refer people for abortion. She does, but it's very painful for her. And in her world as a physician, she feels like, she's saving another human by talking somebody out of having an abortion, whatever. And it was really difficult conversation for me because of the lack of trusting a woman, a pregnant person, to decide what is best for them at that moment in time. And you may regret it later either way. Often, if you regret something, it's because of the cultural things that are heaped on you. I will say that. So you're not going to feel terribly guilty if it's, if you choose to either have a baby or have an abortion and society is supporting you and respecting that you did the best you could at that point in your life. But we don't do that, do we? We pass judgment. And so this is all held in secret and in shame. And no wonder there's people who are, wondering years later, should I have had an abortion? Or, oh my gosh, maybe I did the wrong thing. That's all contextual. It's all cultural. And it's all stemming from a lack of support and respect for people trying to have done the best they could at any point in time in their life. And I walked away and I was really angry at my physician who really believed that she's, doing the best she can by trying to present another view. And I realized in the end, we really were coming at this the same way. In the end, we were trying to help our patients. by exploring different avenues. It wasn't like she wasn't gonna she was, trying to talk people vehemently out of it. She was, signing her clearances for abortions and all. But I tried to get into that mindset. And what I really got from her is fear. It was fear. It's fear for her own life. It's fear that somebody would have aborted her and she wouldn't have gotten her shot. That's what it really boils down to. And it was so painful for her to think about me writing this book and the topic. You could see she was like, like it was painful to think about the babies that didn't get their chance. And I thought, wow, you're not very courageous here. For being a physician and seeing the things that you see, that's not terribly courageous. And yet it's okay. It was who she was in that moment. But it's like that. I can't, don't tell me your story. I can't. And that's what we're dealing with on the political and religious, right. That's what I think.
Yeah. And I think you and I talked about this when we had our conversation, our pre-show conversation. But I feel that this is a level of understanding at a soul level, actually, of who we are. Because when we're younger souls, we believe that we are separate, and we are conditioned usually in those cases in environments that lead us to believe that we are separate from each other. We are separate from the planet. We are separate from divinity. God is up in the clouds. We have to pray and beg for everything. And if we do it wrong, we're going to get sent to hell. And so we believe in these really these dualistic energies, the good and the bad, the right and the wrong, the evil and the blessed. And it's a very black and white polarized understanding of things. It's a very literalist understanding, because if you look at little children also follow that same pathway. They have to learn the rules. First we do A and then we do B. And when they're like 5, they start telling you the rules. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the same behavior of these fundamentalists and these extreme people, is that same level of thinking, that dogmatic literalist thinking. But when you start to expand and mature as a soul and as a person, you start to realize that you're more than just your body. You're more than just your mind. You're actually connected to everything alive on the planet and in the galaxy. And you are divine. You are part of the divine. And you start to have this realization that you have energy that infuses your body. Well, where does that come from? And if you've ever seen anybody die up close that you loved, they're there and they're breathing and you can feel them. And then suddenly they're gone and their body's there, but you don't feel them anymore. It's like, that's the moment you realize they are not their body. They are something other than their body. So all this fear of death has to do with that really simplistic young soul idea of who they are. And so, yes, we have to go through that phase of understanding ourselves in that way. But now it's kind of time to wake up from that and move into a more mature curriculum, which is that we're well beyond this one lifetime and we're well beyond this body. And, there's all kinds of work out there right now helping people to understand themselves in that greater way. I see you're really like, I want to dive into this conversation. So go at it, Patrice.
Yeah. So I really do. It was so healing for me to do the end of my book that some people are like, I don't know what she's talking about, because it's a lot of that. And I love that when we talked about young souls, no matter how old you are chronologically in this world, we still have people who are really young souls at 70, and we have really old advanced souls who are too, right? And I think that the further you get into that, the more you can release into the fluidity between worlds. And so if there are souls passing through a body, it's okay. You're going to get another shot if that's what your soul has really done its work on. So I talk a little bit about that at the end of the book. And there's actually a whole medical department, I think it's University of Virginia, that is looking at kids who talk out of nowhere about past life experiences. And I won't give away everything from this chapter in the book, but the thought that some of these little souls were starting maybe in the same mom and then later on deciding to come back when the time is right. But for me, I did hear a story like that years ago. And it really, for me, it helped me so much to think about that it's okay. It's okay. If you're not coming around this time, maybe we'll meet again. And the level of compassion that these little beings, little sparks that aren't, quite here yet. And there's a tremendous amount of compassion that can come from these little sparks of energy that get a chance again if they want and if you want. And I also talk about the documentary on PBS Frontline. It's excellent, of a woman who was pregnant with twins, and she so bravely went on a PBS documentary to talk to her body that day in the abortion clinic. And she said, I'm so honored that you chose me. Really, I am, both of you, but it's not time right now. I need to pass on this offer. And I thought, wow, yeah, and to give yourself permission to say, thank you for this opportunity, but I can't take the job right now. Maybe next time. So for me, that's incredibly healing and incredibly liberating. But I don't know where all our young souls are with that. And I don't know what your thoughts are about something like that.
No, I actually resonate with that. There's been many cases of women that I've talked to who lost a baby to miscarriage, right? And that is devastating for the mother. It's just really hard for her to want that baby so much and then have the baby decide to leave, have the baby decide not to come, have the baby decide, the soul decide, hey, this fetus I've been developing is not viable for me in this lifetime. It's not the right time for me to come. And so this is where I get excited. I get excited about people waking up to realize that they are souls, they are sovereign beings, and that they cannot really be forced into anything. Maybe temporarily have the experience of being forced, but not really. And that this is a negotiation between souls. It's like this soul wants to come through the mother, and it's working to create a viable fetus for itself to come through. And maybe it might take it 5, 6, 7 times in order to create that viable fetus that it's looking for to come into the lifetime. It could be that the mother needs an initiation into motherhood, and the soul wants the womb to have that initiation before it actually comes through, right? So, mothers can experience these just really traumatic, repeated experiences of miscarriage, right? And now to compound all that trauma, they're being told, oh, well, you can't have this unviable fetus inside of you removed, and it has to come out at birth, even though it's dead for the last 3 months in your body. That's just extra torture. I don't think anybody should have to be put through that. So once again, I'm excited to see the consciousness raising on the planet, the realization of who we are in truth, and the end of this victimization story, the end of this victim, rescuer, perpetrator story that has these literalist young souls really up in arms, you can't do that to me, and it's well, you're a temporary existence. You're wonderful. You're beautiful. You're like that flower that was in my vase last week, and then it died. And then I took it out to the garden, buried it, and then I bought some new flowers. We have to really get comfortable with our own mortality and our own transience and our own, yes, you're important. Yes, you're beautiful. Yes, you're wonderful. And someday you're going to die. And then guess what? There'll be another lifetime that your soul will experience. So it's like this dance between the ego and the soul that many people are opening to right now and been kind of ignorant of. They thought that they were just the personality. They didn't realize they had this other massive consciousness moving through them.
That's right. That's right. It's a real reckoning. And my gut feeling about all this is it is a very temporary and strange clamp down. It's too late. This is the last hurrah for these crazy wars against women. It's desperation is what it is. It's an artificial desperation that cannot last. It cannot be sustained because too many people in this world are waking up. They are, and this is pretty extreme because it's really desperate, trying to keep the lid on things that Pandora's box is open. And so this is a last desperate attempt and it doesn't even make any sense. It's not, it's not really beneficial for anyone, but it's like, but I don't care. We need to engage in holy war, not even really thinking about what it is because it is so desperate.
And the most interesting thing is that these same people will want to prevent the very thing that would prevent unexpected pregnancies, like education, not having young girls be educated about sex, having family systems be healed so that there's no more rape and molestation. I mean, all the things that actually would solve the problem, nobody wants to do that. They just want to prevent the outcome. And that's where I get really righteous myself. Like I have my own version of righteousness, which is that if you're going to complain or try to block the outcome you don't want, why aren't you doing anything about all the things that lead up to that outcome? Why aren't you doing anything about family systems? Why aren't you changing the misogyny? Why aren't you teaching girls to be empowered about their bodies? Why teaching them it's not okay for people to touch you there? If they do, run away, scream, tell somebody. Why aren't you training girls that? Why aren't you training them that they're just as valuable as boys? Why are you continuing to flaunt the story of Eve to every single girl that goes through church? Why are you condemning women when they are just born as little babies with a womb? Why condemn them? And maybe if we stop condemning women and we start celebrating women and we start honoring women, we actually will stop the very thing that you're so upset about. That's kind of like my kind of greatest question is anyone going to take personal responsibility for their own family systems and clean this crap up so that it stops happening? Not like force other people to do the work for you.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's these people want so badly for their women, their girls to be innocent. And we're not innocent anymore. And
It's not an innocent world.
No, we don't need that anymore. But the innocence, their virginity, virgin purity is gone. It's gone. And it's just so sad for people that they can't protect their women and girls from this sexual world.
Meanwhile, if they train their women to be empowered and to love themselves and, hey, go get a vibrator, you wouldn't have a lot of this stuff going on. If you keep teaching women that they need a man to be complete, then you're going to keep having this problem show up because their own lack inside is what's causing them to seek a guy in the first place. If you go out of that paradigm and you stop that process, then women become self-sufficient. And self-sufficient women make better choices than women who are dependent upon approval or validation or a family system that is basically wants them to be powerless so that they can be taken advantage of. So once again, it's like if you want to stop the system, you've got to actually change all the fundamentals of how you think about yourself, how you think about women and what their use is. And that all has to change. The whole ideological package has to change to stop this problem from happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe it truly is. And that's why, again, boy, there's so much pushback because women are done. They're done with this nonsense. And it's really pushing us to, my greatest hope for this conversation for my book are that this becomes a historical moment in time that people look back on and say, wow, you had to be so courageous. You had to be so so brave and so have such conviction because I can't believe you lived through that time. I'm hoping it becomes a historical thing. We're 50, 100 years, hopefully not that long, but, women look back on this and say, what the heck? Because it's just so alien and strange and unnatural.
Yes, exactly. So The Holy War for the Womb. Beautiful. I know that people can get your book on Amazon. Yes, it's called The View from the Clinic. And they can also go to your website, theviewfromtheclinic.com. Is there anything else you want to share before we conclude our episode today?
No, it was interesting. This is a first book for me. I was not a writer by background, but I am now. And I feel really compelled to say that if you want to look into this a little bit deeper, the stories are all there. It's a mosaic. It's a mishmash. Some people don't really like that, but that is the life of a nurse, is that mishmash of people like just coming at you with different stories, different situations. And I did record this as an audiobook. I learned I narrated it. I was a college professor for a while too. So if you're just too busy to pick up a book, and a lot of people are, the audiobook, just listen. Just listen while you're doing your dishes or folding the laundry or out walking the dog. Just listen, because you're going to be able to get some of the nuances and the perspectives of a person, a nurse who has cared for hundreds, if not thousands of people who have been through this. We're hearing the stories of people, of women and people who have been through it personally, but just listen from the perspective of being a fly on the wall, or, the nurse who's just serving humanity. You're going to get a lot out of that. I'm hopeful that people just open their hearts and just are a little bit curious about what this world is, so that you could get inside the clinic and you can sort of take it in as a part of you. You don't have to do that work. I'll do it for you.
Yeah. And educate yourself beyond your perspective, whether you're really, really staunchly pro-choice or really, really staunchly pro-life. Like there's stories in there that will challenge anyone's perspective. In the book, I've been reading it. It's really good. So I recommend it highly. The only way for us to become more conscious is to expand what we're conscious of, what is to listen to the stories and to actually open ourselves to different perspectives and not stay mired in one perspective doggedly, like isolating ourselves from most of humanity so we can keep our perspectives. That's when you know that you're kind of on the wrong track. Yeah. If you need to do that, then your perspective's probably not totally in truth. Anyway, moving on. So thank you so much for having us on the show, Patrice. Beautiful, beautiful. I love everything you're doing. I think it's really important to have this perspective. And I recommend everybody to share this out with anyone you think that you're brave enough, courageous enough to share it out to. I welcome you to do that. And thanks so much for doing that. And now we're going to give people kisses. I always give people kisses at the close of the show. So we love you guys. Here's some kisses. All right, everyone. We'll see you next week on Soul Nectar Show. Have a great week, everyone. Bye for now.
If you found even one gold nugget in this episode of Soul Nectar Show, will you do us a favor? Will you subscribe, like, and share this episode? Maybe even write a comment and let us know what you thought about it. We really, really want to engage with you at a much deeper level. Let's be part of community together. Have a great week, everyone. Bye for now. To dive in deeper to nourishing conversation, visit soulnectar.show.
Soul Nectar Show. Awaken the Soul Nectar Show. Take a sip from the drip of the nectar, from the source of who you are.